Hi, I've got a client who has staff who are quite small, and so even the standard small t-shirt doesn't fit. So what I'm going to do, they wanted me to do it as quickly and economically as possible. So what I'm going to do is take you through that process.
So you can see the t-shirt on the left, it's quite large. I mean, even though it's a small, and it has splits on the sides. And what I'm going to do is I've got to put those splits back on as well. Most of this en masse polos, they usually run in the sides and then they just stitch it down. So that's a good thing from the point of view that I can do the same for the client. So we'll need to undo that stitching to hold it down and do that on both sides. Now I also need to take out the sleeve, so what I'm going to do is just mark around. I don't want to take too much from the armhole, of course. I just want to take it from the shoulder, and when the sleeve goes on, because I'm just going to cut it off, I'm not going to unpick, then it's going to lose the seam allowance for the sleeve and for the armhole. So what I've done is I've calculated how much I need to take off, and then that will also take into account the seam allowance. So because I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, because the client, it's got to be done as economically as possible, because I think I've got something like 72 to do. So I'm just cutting the sleeve off. I don't really want to take any off the sleeve as such, because by the time I actually attach that, I'm losing the seam allowance anyway. It wasn't necessarily the sleeve being too long that was the issue. It was the shoulders being too low. So now I'm just going to cut into that. And as I said, I don't want to take too much from the underneath section. And I'm just going to cut around my chalk mark. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that section that I've cut off as a template and pin that on to the other side and cut the other side exactly the same. But before I do that, what I thought I'd do is just pin this sleeve back on. So it's important to make sure that you put the top of the sleeve, find out which is the top of the sleeve, and pin it on. And I'm going to pin it so that when I sew it back on, I'm sewing onto the sleeve. Now once you've got it pinned into place at the top, then the easiest thing to do is to turn the t-shirt inside out, and then you can lay the sleeve out around. And just because this is a t-shirt, it's a work shirt, just pin around as far as you can to the front. The body of the garment is going to be a little bit bigger than the sleeve, which is fine because it's going to be taken in anyway. So it shouldn't fit. See how there's a difference there? That's fine. We'll make the adjustment for that. Now because the sleeve is smaller, I'm going to pop a pin in just to the inside seam on the body of the polo, and I'm just going to place a dot for the amount that it is the same as the sleeve, and I'll just place that dot all the way down. And then I'll also do that for the split, because I'm going to repeat the split. I'm just putting a line there where the split ends and a line where it's been overlocked up to, so that the split opens out. So now we're going to cut the sleeve off the opposite side, and then once the sleeve's cut off, we'll take that template and we'll lay that template right side, so it's right sides together, and then we can cut the same amount off the body of the garment as we did on the other side. You can use this method for anything when you're altering something, and you've got two sides to it. You do the first side, cut it, and then use that as the template for the second side. We do that for, say, shirt sleeves. When you're cutting them and they've got tails, you only have to cut the front, and then from then on you can lay that over to the back, and then once you've cut to the center of the back, you can lay that across to both sides, and then you get the same amount coming off both sides. So when you have splits, it's very difficult to just sew down and stop right at the top of a split. You can do it, and if you're going to get it to sit properly, you probably need to clip it. So rather than do that, I prefer to overlock probably twice the distance of the split again, so that the two sides, the left and right hand side of that seam allowance, are overlocked off, and then higher up you can bring those two seams together and join them higher up. So what I'm doing now is I'm just trimming off the excess, and then what I'll do is I will overlock those two sides, and then I'll come down from the sleeve to the end and overlock off the excess, and then I'll come down and join those two together. But that means then that the seam allowances of the split will fold back and they will sit flat. And the next thing I'm doing is I'm going to unpick that label, because legally labels must be on garments that are being purchased. It's a legal requirement. And so because these are going from the manufacturer to the new client, they haven't been received by the client yet, then it's extremely important that I put the care label back on. So because this is a uniform and because it's a stretch polo, what I'm going to do to save time is I'm not going to use my sewing machine at all. The only time I'm going to use that is going to be to finish off the splits. So I've threaded up my overlocker with 4 threads, and this is the only time that I use 4 threads is if I'm making a garment, or in this case resizing a garment, and I'm using the 4 threads. Usually I have my overlocker set at 3 threads because most of the time all it's doing is it's doing the edge of a seam or it's doing the edge of a hem, and you don't want to have the 4th thread on if you're doing a hem, because what it will do is it will tend to pull the fabric slightly, and that's why your hem won't sit as flat as you would want it to. So the 4th thread is like, it's called like a stay stitch. So I'm going to just overlock the 2 sides. Now I'm using the loop turner there. I apologize about the lighting. I thought it was a little bit better than it is. I'm using the loop turner just because the threads at the end of the split, I'm going to fold that back. I don't want to just cut the overlocking, because if I cut the overlocking then the stitches will stick out, won't they? They'll fray. So if I use the loop turner and I take the tail and I hook it back through the overlocking, then I have a nice neat finish. So when I fold the split back and I stitch it, there's not going to be any bits of thread sticking out. See, I'm just doing that again. I'm just threading it in and catching it. And the other thing that I need to let you know of is that I've dropped the blade. Normally the blade, as you would sew with an overlocker, you have the blade up and it cuts the fabric at the same time. Because I've actually trimmed the splits to where I want them to be with plus seam allowance, I've taken the blade down so that all I'm doing now is stitching on the very edge of the splits only. When I'm ready to do the rest of the sides above the split, then I will put the blade back up. In this instance, I'm just overlocking the sleeve from the underarm to the edge, and when I do that I will then use the loop turner to pull the tail through, because again I'm going to be folding that seam allowance down. So now I'm ready to do the sides, and I want to lift the blade back up. So you need to take the thread catcher off, and it depends on your overlocker. They're all going to be different. I've got a Janome. I've just got to push it and lift it up, and it's done. So now I'm taking in from the underarm down to the splits, and I can see exactly where my dot is, because nothing's been stitched, right? This is just overlocking off, and it's cutting at the same time as it's overlocking. And I'm just going to come straight down until I come to the top of the split, and I'll meet up with the overlocking, which is on each side of the split. And then when I get down to there, I'm going to make sure the blade is not cutting any of the edge, and then I'll run it off like so. Now you'll notice that I'm doing the other side now, and I'm starting from the split and I'm going up to the underarm. The reason I do that is that I believe that overlocking has a top and a bottom. as you know, the top is different from the underside of the overlocking. So I like to have the top on the front panel and the underside on the back panel. So when I'm taking something in, one side will be from the top down to the bottom and the other side will be from the bottom up to the top. Now we come to reattaching the sleeve, which I had pinned on, and again I haven't sewn it on with the sewing machine, so all I'm going to do is run that around, and as you can see, it's got the 4 threads, which means it's going to use that stay stitch and overlock at the same time. So now we're going to sew the splits and stitch the seam allowance down. And the needle that I use is a 7511 stretch, and I'm using my single plastic buttonhole foot purely because it gives me a little bit more flexibility to see what I'm doing. And it's just a matter of laying the seam down and stitching it. I'm going to just show you using the Jean Genie here. Some of you will have something similar in your sewing kit with your sewing notions. The reason I'm using it is that I need to raise the foot so it's as high as the thickness at the end of the sleeve, because it's got piping, and because of the piping it's making it very, very thick and hard, and then you've got the seam allowance across as well, so it's quite thick. So all I'm doing there, see, I've just placed that so that it raises the foot to the same level, and then it's just a matter of stitching across. And like I'm doing there, I'm moving it by hand, just and then popping with the pin, pushing the underside back so that it doesn't stick out. Now we come to the splits. And the only thing you want to do here is you need to stitch down to the section where the split is going to end, not down the bottom of the hem, I mean at the top of it, and like most splits are around 2.5 inches, which in metric is, for you metric ladies, so 5 and a bit, 6 centimeters. So now we're going to start on the edge of the overlock and stitch down to where I put the dot, which is the top of the split, and then we'll do that on both sides, and then we'll just turn the seam allowance back on the splits, stitch them down, and then it's finished. Oh, and put the label back on. Do check and make sure that both sides of the splits are even. because sometimes when you're sewing, depending on the fabric, one side can stretch a little bit more than the other. Of course, you'd have to unpick and ease it back in so that they are the same. And now all I'm doing is stitching the splits down. You'll notice that I use the Jean Genie at the very front, and I'm also using it again at the end. I mean, I use it for everything. You can buy plastic ones. I do have some of these available. I'm not sure for how long, but you know, they're worth their weight in gold, or anything similar that's going to lift the foot so that it's the right size as the thickness of the fabric that you're sewing. So this is just one of many ways you can downsize a t-shirt. I had to do it for a corporate client, therefore I had to do it in such a way that it was almost as close to or similar to how I received it. Happy altering!